Of the 4 goals that are leading the direction of this revised national curriculum, one concerns effective pedagogy or quality teaching, or whatever words you prefer. What we do know is that there's no one definitive model or approach, research-based or otherwise, that has a premium on what constitutes effective pedagogy or quality teaching. Regardless, every school needs to be able to reach a position on what constitutes quality teaching in its school. It also needs to be confident that that particular position is well informed, it's balanced, and that it's what is actually resonating in the practice throughout the school. At the heart of this revised curriculum is the learner. The notion of the learner requires something of a shift, in that we're no longer just talking about the students. The learner here is conceived of as all those who are engaged in education in the school. So we need to, as teachers, be modelling overtly that we too are learners in the context of teaching and learning in the school environment. Quality teaching, at the end of the day, is confirmed by quality learning. So we need to spend a little bit of time understanding just what we do mean by learning. And there are various attempts at quantifying what the effects of teachers are, different teachers, and their impact on student learning. Well, these are disputed in terms of numbers that are given, percentages. It's probably more useful to actually just recognise that teaching does make a difference, and that different teachers have different impacts, and using that as a basis for reflecting on our own practice and reviewing our own practice, rather than quantifying the degree of difference. Stoll, Fink and Earle give a very nice list of what we know about learning. And they say, well, it doesn't just happen at school, it doesn't just happen by design, it isn't just necessarily a conscious thing, and they say that it goes on all the time throughout life regardless. A high point of their list is that learning, by definition, is change. Change in terms of a level of understanding or knowledge or competency or how a value is lived out. Sadler says that for learning to have happened, we must be able to do something on demand, we must be able to do it independently of others on our own, and we must be able to do it well. That's a useful reference point for thinking about, well, what does constitute learning having occurred? Sometimes perhaps there is an overemphasis or an overstatement about what schools should be able to actually achieve in terms of the learning that occurs amongst their students, the learning outcomes as we often hear. Again, we need to put all of this into perspective. We need to appreciate that the school can do so much, but it can't do everything on its own. We know that students spend a relatively small percentage of their overall waking hours in the school setting. The rest of the time is in the community, the family, the life beyond school. We also know that that larger percentage of time has a huge impact on students' achievement, their capacity to learn, depending upon their relative advantage in life, the opportunities that they have in life, and so on. Hence, manifest quite clearly in continual reports of achievement data that divide students up in their performance according to socioeconomic status. John Hattie says that his studies show that about 30% of all learning can be attributed to the school and the teacher, and 70% of all learning attributable to the student's background and what I've called their own natural assets. We are all different. This graph is a generalisation. There are some areas of learning where the percentage of the school's influence is less or higher than others. Mazzano, in his analyses, argues about 80% of all achievement can be attributed to learning beyond the school and the student's own individual makeup. Well, trying to put a definite number on it probably isn't worth too much of our time, but the key message here is that whilst what we do in schools does play a valuable part, The school on its own cannot do everything. Hence the need for that, trying to work to that fourth major directional goal of the revised national curriculum, engaging others in the life of the student in their education that happens at school. Let's turn our attention now from learning to teaching, accepting that both are interrelated, inextricably so. The words that we use, the language, the jargon that we use in our teaching profession can sometimes be guilty, or deliberately so, of shaping our particular view or perspectives on matters. It's a device. If you turn to the Shorter Oxford Dictionary and look at the definition for pedagogy, you might ask yourself whether in fact this is a word that you feel comfortable with. A pedagogue being a schoolmaster, a teacher, especially a strict, pedantic, dogmatic one. Do you like that term? Whereas a teacher is a person or a thing who teaches or instructs, especially a person employed to teach in a school. And to teach is to show the way. Something nice about that. To educate is to bring up children so as to form their habits and manners and their intellectual aptitudes. Sometimes if we can just come back to uncomplicated, well-known language and terminology, we might be doing our processes, our communications, the development of our practice a service, rather than kidding ourselves that using the latest jargon, the latest fashion language is going to in itself make a difference or give clarity to definition. The New Zealand curriculum on page 7 makes a very important distinction between what the different parts of this document actually offer, what they require. It gives directions for learning and it provides guidance for learning. Make the distinction clear in your mind. The directions for learning are the different dimensions of the curriculum that every school is obligated to include. The guidance section is there to help you to inform the development of your own thinking and your own position. So we have guidance statements, for example, on pedagogy, on assessment, on developing the school's curriculum. So we need to ask ourselves then, is effective pedagogy about a methodologically data-driven process? That is one of the prevailing views. Or for you, is it about quality teaching? Is it about a set of unconditional and observable qualities, characteristics and actions that you want to see in your school? Now there's a totally different perspective on each of these dimensions. The school needs to grapple with these and say, what is the ethos of education in the school? Is it a technical, rational, managerial sort of process, or is it an intuitive, expressive, creative one? Now, in truth, probably the best things come from balance, and not tipping the balance or swinging the pendulum too far in one direction or the other. So it's not necessarily a one or the other approach. But as James says, the difficulty in the climate that's developed around initial teacher training, and I might add teacher development programs over the last 15 years, has been the reduction of teaching to a fairly atomistic collection of technical competencies, which can be assessed, measured as outcomes, and compiled and represented as data. We need to ask ourselves, is teaching a science, a technical process, one that's managed, waltz, next steps, or is it an art? Or do we see it as a balance between the two of those? So to what degree is teaching, or could it be an art or a science, or a combination of the two? This is a matter of considerable debate and dispute. But I think every school, every teacher should come to some position on how it regards these two angles, if you like, on what teaching is about. Solway, in his delightfully titled book, The Turtle Hypodermic of Sikkim Pods, says, I should mention at the outset that I'm not very keen on pedagogical theory and tend to regard such speculative excess as a form of evasion or deception or self-delusion. The manifold problems at medieval schools cannot, in my estimation, be solved or rectified by the usual onslaught of dogmas, reforms and so on. I think it's healthy for us to read and accept challenges to our minds and how we're doing things. They can bring us back onto the level. Now, there are different views on what constitutes quality teaching or effective pedagogy. My method with teachers in a school is to say, okay, you people are quite experienced, you're very practiced, you know a lot. You've been doing this job. You do it firsthand. You've sustained it for, in some cases, quite a few years. Let's value what you know, what you understand from practice. Then I ask them to, in a group of 3 or 4, no bigger, I want everybody taking part, I ask them to identify what they consider to be the key dimensions of quality teaching that should be evident in practice in that school. They work away on that. Then I say, okay, now you've not used any texts or books or research articles to develop those ideas. In other words, we've valued your experience. But it's not really sufficient just to say, or it would be arrogant to say, that we know best. What we need to do now is to have a look at some references, some other viewpoints about what is quality teaching or effective pedagogy. Then we need to say, well, are there messages in here, in these statements that we're looking at, that would help strengthen our own position? Are there oversights in what we've come through? Now, in using this particular approach, it's a bottom-up approach as opposed to a top-down approach of always being told by others, by experts, by gurus, what you should be doing. Can you appreciate how this can ferment a much greater sense of professionalism than the top-down approach? We've provided you with a series of slides on different viewpoints of what different people view to be effective pedagogy. And what we can find from looking at these different viewpoints is that there's no one best particular viewpoint that sits there. So our role as teachers is to draw from these and to make our own discerning critical judgments about those that should prevail in our own practice. Some schools have done this in a manner that is actually set out in their school's curriculum documentation and finds its way into their performance management system. So this talk about what is good teaching in our school has got some true meaning because it becomes a basis for reflective practice. It is not just yet another statement to fill up yet another page of what might look nice in our school's curriculum documentation. It is something that we put ourselves to the test on and becomes part of the worth of our professional integrity.